done. Okay, yes, so today we are talking about state, and specifically state in React. So state is not unique to React, it's not a unique concept to React. We often need to manage the state of an application, and essentially state is just any value that we expect to change over time in our application. So some of the most common examples will be maybe if you're playing an online game, a very simple online game that keeps track of your score, then that score would be stored in the state, because it will change based on your interactions with the game or your interactions with the web page. The score will increase or decrease based on your behavior and your interactions with the application. So again, state is just anything inside an application that we expect to change, and therefore we can store things in what we call the state, or the state object, or a state variable. And we expect these variables or these objects to change over time based on the user's interactions. Hopefully that makes it at least clear why we would use state and what it is, and then React itself just has its own way of handling state. So different languages, different libraries, different frameworks will each have their own way of handling state. But when it comes down to it, they're all fundamentally similar. They're just trying to give us a nice, concise, easy syntax to manage things that we expect to change in our application. That's it, data that we expect to change in our application. Alright, I've repeated myself quite a lot there, so that should have driven the point home. And my very, very basic example that I'm going to look at is firstly just the counter. You always get the counter example when we begin looking at state. Let's see if I can get some light on the subject here so I can see what I'm doing. But alright, apologies for the quick delay. So as well as the counter example, we'll also look at just toggling a login component on and off, which I think is exactly what Darius has created himself using class-based components. And I will create a far uglier toggle login button just to demonstrate as well. And we can also use state to toggle whole components on and off, so to conditionally display whole components or whole parts of our application. So I know Alana's coming on to components now. Wes has looked at them, Darius has definitely looked at them, and Daniel, if you just think of it as an isolated bit of code that we've put into its own file because it does a very specific function. It just handles one part of our application. So we might have a login component, and that login component just does the login, nothing else, and then we can import it into another part of our application. With the example of CodeFlix, you're going to create a gallery component that displays all of the movies, and then you'd have an individual movie component as well. So we can just start to break up our code into manageable chunks or manageable components. So a couple of components we're going to create: a count component and a login component. The count component is just going to be a counter that we can increase and decrease, and the login component will just toggle a login button. So I'm going to render these just inside my app.js, my main app component. And we'll talk about that later when we'll show how we can conditionally log in. But what it essentially wants to do is the count component is going to be these three items at the top, and we should be able to increase it, decrease it, do whatever we want. So the value of the counter is something that we store inside of the state, because that's the bit that we expect to change. This text doesn't change, count colon. The increase button doesn't change, the decrease button doesn't change. So none of that needs to go in the state. But this number that is actually changing, we want to store in the state. And notice that maybe if some of you are used to developing many years ago, or you just started with development, you might think, if something changes, we have to refresh the whole page. Well, maybe in the past we actually did have to do that. But now we can just use React to monitor just a tiny part of the application, and it will just refresh the necessary bit in the DOM without having to refresh the whole HTML page, for example.
If you refresh it now, go back to 0.
So if I refresh now, it will go back to 0. So state we could make it persist, but we'd need to do something else to make it persist. Yeah, and state, I guess coming on to my next point, is if I just click on my example of the count one for now. We're going to recreate these, but this will give you a rough idea of how it's set out. Then whatever value I put in here will be the initial value of the state. So I've set that to 0. I've specifically said to begin with, when the application loads up for the first time or reloads, then that score or that counter is 0. If I did change that and put a number 6 in there and I refresh the page, well, you can already see it, but I refresh the page, it's going to actually initialize as a 6. Yeah, but it doesn't really make sense, so I'll put it back to a 0 for now.
Did you get it to initialize with the value that it was last at?
So that's the thing. You would need to take some extra steps for that. And when you say initialize at the value it was last at, do you mean if you've gone away for a day and then you open up your browser and it's on your previous value, or do you mean, in what context do you mean?
So you set the state of the count state to 0.
Yep.
And if you change it to 6, it starts at 6.
Yep.
But if you can do that count using the increase count button, or
Yep.
decrease it using the decrease count button,
Uh-huh.
and then leave it like that, is there a way to record that state? So that if you were to refresh the page, it would come back to that state, not the original state you used.
You would have to store it somewhere else, and you've got various options for that. So maybe I'll show you at the end. We did a bill calculator app today, and the bill should initialize to the previous meter reading, right? And that meter reading was coming from a third-party API, if you like, or the energy company's API on the web. It would pull the data from there, and that would be the initial value of the state. Yeah, and then to make the state value persist, you're either going to have to store it in a database, you're either going to have to store it on a back-end server. Yeah, because the way JavaScript works is if that line of code ever runs again, well, of course it's just going to reset the state to 0. Yeah. So I guess the only way you could do it, well, yeah, I can't think of an easy way to do it. You need some way to persist the data. Yeah, and
So
data
you can't
persistence
apply
is a back-end, or you can do it client side, but you'd have to use something like local storage,
Okay.
session storage, IndexedDB. Those are the versions that we have on the client. Yeah, those are the solutions that we have on the client. And things like that are used for progressive web apps. Yeah, where we can get offline web apps now, and we don't just store them in a temporary cache that can easily be deleted. We store them in some sort of storage on the user's PC. Often they have to grant permission for that though. We can't just store anything we want on their computer, so there might be a little notification at the top. The web page wants to store a tiny bit of data on your computer. Do you accept? And if they click yes, then we could make things persist. But if they decline that, then we've got to think of other ways around that. Yeah.
Are you using hooks here, are you? Which we haven't really been introduced to?
Yeah, so I thought in the CodeFlix tasks, then most of the videos are done based on class-based components, yeah? So I thought it would be nice to look at state using functional-based components, at least hopefully that's something a bit new for everyone, and it is where the React team is trying to push us into using functional components and into using hooks. And we'll do a little comparison at the end with how much code you need for functions and how much code you need for hooks and the different syntax. And hopefully you'll agree that the function-based syntax is a lot simpler as well.
Yeah, cool. We did the class.
You did the
Class-based
class-based
components.
Okay, so that works even better. Yeah, so Ricardo did classes for you on Monday, so now we're looking at hooks. Thanks for letting me know that you've covered some state stuff. Cheers. Yeah. So, going back to the demo app, we're going to recreate that counter first using React hooks, use state hook, and then this is a totally separate component that I can just toggle on, and there the component appears. And at the moment it says you are logged out, and if you click login, it changes to you are logged in, and changes the button to log out. Yeah, so just a very simple toggle component as well, and that can all be controlled just by setting something in the state, is logged in, for example. Is logged in, true or false. Yeah? It's just a nice way to toggle displays based on one boolean stored in the state. But we'll come to that, and I might even just get rid of the counter so that we can just see one thing at a time. It's a bit confusing otherwise, but this is the end of a workshop that we did last week, so we had multiple things on the screen and we're just trying to take it a bit further. But anyway, back to the count example first. So, yeah, we need to recreate a counter. Of course, I've got one already written, but let's just start from scratch. We want to create a brand new React functional-based component. What do I need to do? Yeah, always start with, I'm really going to have to get this light on, otherwise I'm going to struggle. Yeah. So import React from React, or Redactor. Yeah, import React from React. Awesome. Next thing, we want to create a functional-based component, so I think I should probably just do that. Call it counter. That's my syntax, right, for any function. Function, the name of the function, parentheses, and the curly braces. Yeah, so usually with state, we would define it right at the top of our function. And there's a specific hook to handle simple cases of state in modern versions of React. And maybe I should just check at this point that I am using a more modern version of React. You see this little value here, 16.8, and mine actually says greater than or equal to 16.8, and it's that for a very good reason. So before React version 16.8, hooks did not exist. Hooks were a new addition in February of 2019, this year, and that was the 16.8 release version of React. So make sure if you want to use hooks that you have a React version of 16.8 or greater. So that looks good. I'm set up, I can use hooks. So the specific hook to manage state or manage simple cases of state in React, does anyone know what it's called?
Use state?
Use state, yes. So most of the new hooks, I think probably all of the new hooks actually begin with the word use. See these? Use callback, use context, use effect, use memo, use reducer, use ref, and use state. So these are all hooks. These are all predefined hooks for us. You can make custom hooks as well, which gives us a lot more freedom and a lot more power, but for now these are the built-in ones. There might be a few others that aren't on that list, but that's certainly most of them. So we can import the use state hook. And now I will be able to use that inside of my function. Typically we define it at the top. It uses something called array destructuring. Does anyone know what array destructuring is? Would you like a quick example first? Ricardo loves his fruits. Let's go for the fruits, yeah? If we had an array of fruits, and you can shout out random fruits if you want, you can go exotic, you can go boring, whatever you prefer. Other fruits? Sexy fruit. What would you class as a sexy fruit? Peach. Oh, peachy. Passion fruit. Okay, that'll do for now, right? Let's leave it there. So, if I have 3 items in an array, and I want to assign them all into separate variables rather than in a grouped variable like that. So I don't want my variable to be a whole array. I want each variable to be assigned to a string. I can use array destructuring. So I could say sexy fruit 1. It's not good names, but just it's a good example, perhaps. Sexy fruit 2, and guess what? Sexy fruit 3, and we can put that all equal to fruits. So that sort of syntax, let me just give us a bit more room. That syntax will mean that sexy fruit 1 is assigned the value of banana, sexy fruit 2 is assigned the value of passion fruit, and sexy fruit 3 is assigned the value of peach. Yeah, this sort of syntax. An array destructured into separate variables based on the values of this variable, which is an array itself. Yeah? So you have object destructuring and you have array destructuring. This is array destructuring.
Okay. So then that's because I've seen it before with curly brackets, that's
Yeah.
the object.
So that's the object destructuring, and this is array destructuring. So it can be quite useful, but it depends, right? I find the object destructuring more useful at this stage, but depending on how your data is set up, then array destructuring could be very, very useful as well. So based on that sort of syntax, we can use a very similar syntax for our useState hook. It looks like this. Our first one is our name of the state variable. We're going to rename these, don't worry, it's just to be descriptive and tell you what it is. And then we have the method to change the state variable. So we can destructure the result of calling useState into two things. In other words, that means when we invoke useState, useState returns an array, and it returns an array containing two things. The first thing is the name of our state variable, so in other words, what we want to monitor in the state. In this case, it would be the count or the counter. And then the second thing is the method that we want to invoke every time we want to change the state. So in a class-based component, for those that have looked at it, it was called setState. Do you remember? Yeah, you called setState to change the value of a state variable. So this we could call setCount. That's the convention. Yeah, you prepend it with set, and then the second name matches the variable that we wish to change.
So what actually is useState? It's a function.
useState is a function, and when we invoke that function, it behind the scenes sets up a dynamic variable for us, if you like, or a variable that is monitored by React for changes in its value. And it also sets up a method to change that variable that we're monitoring, and when that variable is changed using this method, it forces a re-render of our page, so that when I think I've disabled it now, but when I actually click this, the page does change. There's no delay, it's straight away it refreshes the necessary part of the page and re-renders it. So if we just assign that to a normal variable, it wouldn't necessarily re-render our component. However, because we're going to use setCount to update the counter, then it's going to force that refresh and re-render of the page.
And you don't have to mess about with this.
And we don't have to mess about using the this keyword, which we would need in a class-based component. So that simplifies it, and I always forget to write this.state everything, and this just simplifies it in that case. So it's the same sort of syntax, and inside of the parentheses we can put the initial value that we want for the counters. This is what we briefly looked at the start. Yeah, we said we initialize that value of count to be 0. So that bit in isolation would just be doing something like that. Let count equals 0. Yeah, that combined with a 0 in there is initializing a variable equal to 0. Any questions on that bit? Because it's one of the hardest bits, but it's obviously important.
So you don't need a state object.
No, we don't pass a state object. I mean, this could be an object in here. That's your choice. You could make an object in there with, I don't know, counter 0 in, if you really wanted, but it's not typically the way we would do it with a useState hook. We would have separate invocations of useState for different things that we wanted to change. So if we had the is logged in state, we would do it separately like that. Set is logged in. So typically for each state variable that we wish to change, we would invoke useState again, rather than mashing them all together in one object. This I find a little bit annoying sometimes, but if you're monitoring lots of different state variables in one component, maybe it's time to refactor your component anyway, so it's probably not a huge drawback.
Semicolons?
Semicolon should be there, absolutely, yeah. It's a statement still, so please put the semicolon at the end. You know I'm bad with my semicolon. Thank you for the reminder. Yeah, so that's set up the state. Next, let's write what we want to display on the screen, I think, yeah? So we don't need a render because this is a functional component. We want to return something. A good practice is just to put this fragment in there straight away and then put everything else inside the fragment and put your semicolon there, of course, anyways. And then inside of the fragment I can put as many elements as I want now nested inside, and I'm not going to get that adjacent React warning. Yeah, so I think we definitely wanted 2 buttons, didn't we? So button 1, button 2, one's going to increase and one's going to decrease, and we can we just have a paragraph, is that right, do you mind? And the current count or value of count is, yep, so if I just take a look at my page at this stage, in fact, yeah, so this is an incomplete component, but let's just say we want to see what this incomplete component looks like. How would I render that inside of app.js? Or what do we still need to do to this component? Yeah, firstly we've got to export any function that we want to make available in our whole project. So I could write my export default up there, and that would just export the one component. We always do that, and that's probably the best practice. So just so we know the other way, let's do it the other way. We could just also write export, and then write the name of the function we wish to export in curly braces like that. So I could also export counter. Yeah, and this will work if I have multiple things that I want to export in there. Yeah, I could just separate random commas. So this here is a named export. I have to make sure all the names match. Counter, counter, and then in app.js, I must make sure that it says counter. If I put count, it won't be able to find it. The names must match. However, when I do the export default up there, I can call it whatever I want. Yeah, it's a non-named import or just a default import. So just be aware of the differences and the fact that you can only have one export default, whereas you can have as many down here as you want. Many functions you can export as you want, but they must have their correct name when you import them. Where are we importing from? It looks like the file was called count workshop. Workshop.js. I don't need the JS, so I could drop it. And then down here, I'm not rendering count anymore. I'm rendering counter. Yeah. And for now, just to avoid any confusion, I'm going to comment out all the login based code, so we only see the counter. Attempted count workshop does not contain a default export imported as counter. Ah, yes. So up here as well, we need to make sure that that is in curly braces because it's not a default import. So again, it just needs to match, right? If we're exporting like that, make sure you import like that. I've got some warnings. Use state is defined but never used. Login is defined but never used. Is that in a different component? App.js. Oh, so I haven't commented that out. And at the moment, we can get rid of that. Good recap later. Compile with warnings. That's for example finished it. We should be okay to go from there. All right. So now we've got the component that we've begun to create. We've got an increase, we've got a decrease, and we've got the current value of count is, which is very small and the buttons are very big for some reason. I must have some strange styles going on somewhere. No worries. How do I make the counter, or this count variable, display my correct value? So we said we wanted 0 initially. How do I actually render that count variable to the page? Yeah, I just need some curly braces. And I write the name of the variable, which in this case is count. So no this dot state dot anything, nothing like that needed, just the name of the variable. And hopefully if I go back now, it should say 0, but if I click on anything, nothing's going to happen, right? We haven't set up the event handlers. So I suggest that be our next step. Yeah, when I click on the button, we increase or decrease the count variable. Any ideas how I would do that then? How do I function? Or you want to create a new function?
Yes.
Okay, we can create a new function. There's no problem with that. What would you like to call that function? Increase count. Okay. I assume you're going to want one called decrease count in a minute, so I'll do that for you now. Yep, carry on with the increase count function. What would you like it to do? Yeah.
It's just count.
Yeah, to access count would be just count.
And now it's actually variable, so we use equal or double. I think equal, yeah.
Equal, you want equal?
Means increment.
Yeah, we just need to increment it. And don't forget, if we want to change the value of count, we should invoke this method so that the re-render gets triggered. Yeah? So we definitely need to invoke set count. That would be the first thing. And then we just got to work out what we want to send into set count. So that would just set it to the same value. Yeah? So, yeah, just add 1 onto the count. That's all we want to do. Set the count to whatever it was plus 1. Simple as that, to increase the value by 1. And likewise, to decrease it, we want to write a function that sets the count to the count minus 1. It really is that simple. So just notice where I wrote my functions as well. They're nested functions. They're still inside of this parent function, so that I have access to them inside of my return statement. Because that would be the next step, because it's still not going to do anything at this stage, right? Nothing's happening. And if I wrote just a simple console.log in here of the increase function, sorry, can't spell, still can't spell, function has been triggered, or something like that. I have this bad habit lately of not doing my quotes at the start. It's annoying me, but anyway. So if that function was called, we should see something in the console. So there's probably absolutely nothing wrong with our function. It's just the fact that the function is never being invoked at this stage, right? So how do we make that bit of code run based on when someone pushes this button? Yeah, so we just need some sort of event to be triggered whenever that button is clicked, and there's a built-in event in HTML called the Onclick event. Have to write it like that. Inside of React, it usually has a lowercase c, but all events inside of React are camel case, so just be aware of that. We set that equal to, there are numerous ways of doing this, but for now we're just going to go with putting a callback function inside of there, and the callback function itself needs to invoke the function we want to run. So for that one it's called increase count. Don't just leave it like that, make sure you invoke the increase count function so that we return the result of it. And likewise we can do exactly the same for the decrease function. Okay, everything's now compiled successfully, which is great. It means we've referenced everything that we created. Going back to our application. Oh, I didn't actually mean to click it, but I clicked it. You see the console.log has been triggered and the count was increased. We can do that again. The decrease also works. I think we've successfully reproduced the count component. I am just going to give you as much room as possible on that, and then give you the opportunity to ask any questions of, do you understand what this is doing?
Simplifies.
I think it simplifies class-based components significantly when dealing with state, and in fact we'll probably now convert this one into a class-based component and then convert it back, or we can just have them side by side, maybe on a split screen, and we can see the difference. I think that might be quite useful.
Can you use event listeners in these functions, or are they just...
Event listeners, well, that's what you've done here. You've added an Onclick event listener,
Right.
and then the event handler is essentially your increase count in this stage, right? This is listening for any click events, and then when that click event happens, that's the result of it. That's the event handler. It's an inline event listener, this one.
Because normally I see an add event listener where you're taking a tag from the HTML.
Yep.
I guess for it.
Absolutely. I mean, you can still do it that way. You can still do, is it attached to the window or the document? I always forget the event listeners, but whatever, the .add event listener method, and then you can...
Yeah, so you like do a query selector to match something in the HTML.
yeah, so you assign it to a specific
and
element.
then you
True.
add an event listener to that.
Yeah, so you could have definitely done it that way, but it's quite a bit more long-winded. And behind the scenes, this is doing very similar to what add event listener does. It's not the old style of inline event listeners, which were frowned upon a little bit. This is essentially adding an actual event listener based on a click event. So we have lots of these. We could have on click. You've got on change, right? Other common ones. Probably on all the on mouse events, on mouse down.
So you can
Lots of
access the
different-
event here as well.
Can access
The
the
event itself.
event object.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you would have to pass it in there, yeah, as an E or an event, and then up here, this time I'm going to log the event object. So I can say the event object is, and then put my E there, put it there, and this should now log out to the console what the event object is. And there it is. We've got a class, and inside of it are all of these properties, and one of the most common ones is event.target. Why is it not letting me drill down into it? Maybe that's how React deals with it. It puts it in a class rather than just a plain old object, but hopefully I could access individual parts of it. Let's say I did e.target, and we should see that original button that called it. Oops, sorry. There you go, look, the event object is button increase. So that is the target that triggered the event. Sorry, I'm trying to make my console bigger, not the other. There we go. Yeah, so the e.target value is the button that triggered the event. And there's lots of other useful properties, as you probably saw on there, but e.target is one of the most commonly used ones.
Where is target actually?
Where is it?
I have it.
You have it? Yeah, no, I've just shown it. We've got it.
Yeah,
That's
but
what I've.
even if you don't call target in the event,
That's what you're saying?
just
So,
remove the target.
yeah.
Yeah, try again.
So we should get the whole event object now. And then, oh, it's listed separately there, yeah. Okay, I didn't see that. Yeah. And then we've got it here.
Yeah.
Ah, but then there it's null, which is strange.
There is target, but there is no button.
I just think it's the way React nests it. It seems to nest it in a strange way. But you can still certainly reference it by e.target and e. Whatever else you need. Get its position on the screen. Type. So if I did e.type, it would say click event. Still says null there for some reason, but up here, type, click, yeah. Clearly says that it's a click event there. So anyway, does that sort of answer your question anyway, otherwise? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, you can definitely get access to the event object via the inline React event listeners and handlers. For this very simple case, I probably wouldn't have bothered creating an extra function. I like it, it's good practice to create extra functions, but you can just do it all in line. We could just say set count there and do count plus 1. Yeah, I think that's still concise, and then we can get rid of all of that, and we can do the same thing there. Of course, if it's going multiple lines or it's unreadable inside of your return statement, don't do that. Create the separate functions as Darius suggested. But just for simple cases like this, I think that works lovely. Yeah, and now it's even shorter. Now it's even more concise. And just to prove it still works, right? Is Darius testing it until it breaks? All I can hear is all these clicks. Will it work for 100?
If I click fast enough.
Oh yeah, are you saying, is there a lag or something like that? I don't know, did it work? Did you trip it up? Or it refreshed fast enough?
Right now.
Okay, don't worry about it, yeah. You can play with that in your own time, you can see how fast you can click and break the display. Alright, yeah, so that's essentially one of the most basic examples of using state that we will get. We worked out our application needs to monitor something is going to change based on the user's interaction, in this case just clicking a button, yeah, the most simplest case of a user interaction, and then we invoked the method that was set up for us to change that value. And in principle, that's all there is to it. And we could apply that for a variety of use cases. Okay.
So in the real world,
In the real world, yeah.
what would you, like, in a practical application, what would you use this state for? Just to give me an idea. Shopping.
Say again?
Shopping.
Shopping, yeah, you could definitely store your cart, yeah, your items. You would store an object based on all the items that the person has currently got in their basket, so they're ready to buy. You would store them there, and you can update or delete items, and change the quantities, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you would use the state for that, absolutely. You use the state all over the place, yeah. The next example I was going to show you was just to toggle on certain displays or toggle on certain components. So based on whether the user's logged in or not, we show them a dashboard or we show them a login page, don't we? That's the very first thing when you go to a site. often nowadays they force you to log into everything, right? So when you go on a page and you're not logged in, you see login now box. That's conditionally rendered based on something in the state. Is logged in false.
Things like drop downs, that
Drop downs, so
states as well.
drop downs are going to be pre-rendered for the options, but what are you thinking of there?
Oh, drop downs, like select.
Like select boxes, I think you mean. You're going to have all those options stored in the raw code,
Yes.
and then the
options
current,
themselves are going to be somewhere, and then just.
but the current value that's selected could be stored in the state, absolutely, yeah.
Like selecting tabs. What was that?
Selecting tabs.
I think that's done by default.
It's done by default, or it would be done by a focus event. You'd have a focus event that you could just call any time you wanted to see what was the current focus on the page or the current focus tab. So I don't think you need extra state for that. Almost the DOM's already doing that for you. The browser's already monitoring that bit of state for you. Yeah, the same principle. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, go on.
That's done.
Could you use that for, say, filtering and, like, I don't know, going back to the shopping, you are looking for, say, black t-shirts.
Yep.
Short sleeve. You
Yep.
have to filter black t-shirts,
Yeah.
short sleeve. Would that be used for that as well, or like
Yeah.
preferences, for example, or filtering, or?
It absolutely could be, but probably you're just going to be. A good question.
Because you know when you're looking for something and you select your preferences, it gives you the results.
Yeah.
And if you click on refresh, you pretty much lose your selection.
It resets the filter, yeah. So I guess in that case they must be storing your filtered selections in the state somewhere, yeah. And then it's taking those selected filters and then running it through a bit of filter code, right? To actually render the results on the page. Yeah, you wouldn't be storing, I imagine, the whole t-shirt collection in state and then just selecting only part of them in state. You would just store whether they clicked on medium. So in the state would be size, medium, another value in the state, gender, male or female, right? And then based on those values in the state, just render the ones that you want. Yeah, absolutely. You could definitely use state for that, and they probably do most of the time. Yeah. So it's a very powerful concept, and I'm glad you're able to see some use cases for it. As I say, anything that you want to just monitor that it's changed in the application, you can store in state. It's not for the computer's benefit, it's more for us as humans to just remember this is going to change or this has changed and let the computer deal with it. But yeah, it doesn't really make any difference to the computer whether it's in state or not, right? It can still monitor all these variables, but for us it makes sense to say that these things are stateful variables, they're going to change, monitor them please, and then separate the stuff that's not going to change just in your other code or pure components or something like that. Yeah, nice.
I've seen before you can use it when you're searching, so when each key changes the search string and brings back different selections, so to predict what you're looking for.
Yeah, they might not have used a React state, they might just be directly connected to the history API or something like that, or some other search history for that. I'm not quite sure where they're storing those. But again, look, the history API is just a store of state. But this time it's storing searches or it's storing URLs rather than storing whatever you've told it to store. So it's the same concept, but maybe not done using the use state method in React. This is just React's way of handling stateful data. Cool. What do you want to do next? Rewrite it as a class-based component alongside and see the difference and see both ways of doing it? Yeah? So I'm going to leave that code there. I'm going to go for a split screen. And that's going to change both of them, right? So if I create a new file first. That'll do. Count workshop copy. Let's rename it to count workshop class. Then we'll split the screen, get rid of it that side, So on this side, yeah, we've got our old version. I'll give us a bit more room while we're working, and then we'll try and get them side by side afterwards. Okay. Should I do it fairly quickly, and then we can talk about it afterwards? Is that alright? I'll say what I'm doing as I go along, rather than getting input from you all the time. So we don't need the useState hook, because that is only for functional based components. So I'm going to change my function to a class. That means I don't have any inputs into my class. I'm not using the useState, but I'm just going to comment it out there for now, just so I can remember what my variables were called. I need a constructor instead, because we're inside a class. I need to invoke super so that I have access to the parent, and in fact I should probably put the parent component in here now, which is React.component. This makes all class-based components in React very similar, so they all have access to the render method, they all have access to other lifecycle methods like component did mount. It just means they have some extra functionality. Yeah, we're not having to recreate every single class from scratch. We're creating a class that obeys to the React principles, and it is able to monitor the DOM, set the state, and all cool stuff like this that we need to do in most applications. So that's why I'm extending it from a parent class. I have to call super so that I can get access to that parent class, or its constructor at least. So React.component itself will have its own constructor. Calling super means that I have access to React.component's constructor and anything set inside there as well. Right, so that was that bit, and then I do this dot state. This is how I set the initial state inside of a class-based component. That must be in the form of an object. My variable can be the same, count and count. And then the value, I want to give count for its initial value. Again, I'm going to keep the same thing. It's going to be 0. I don't know why I copied and pasted that. I think just to emphasize the point that it is the same. Yeah, so that's essentially that replicated there. So I'm going to get rid of that now. I was complaining about just having a return. The return can stay exactly as it is between a class and a functional based component. However, I do need a render for a class based component, so that it actually knows to render this stuff. Okay. Yeah, so that's all okay in terms of the syntax of a class-based component. However, down here we're still using the setCount method. So setCount no longer exists because that was created by the useState hook. How we set the state inside of a class-based component is we always call the setState method. That doesn't matter if this is called count, if this is called age, if this is called gender, if this is called whatever. Yeah, it doesn't matter. We always call the setState method to update the state of any variable. And setState again needs to take an object. And it takes an object of the things that we want to update. And we want to update the count, and we want to update it to whatever the count previously was, which I can't just reference by count. I have to reference by this dot state dot count, because that's the value that was currently stored in the state, plus 1. So it's gone from that essentially to all of that, just to do the same thing in a class-based component. So here I cannot reference count variable. I have to reference this dot state dot count, state dot count, and then I have to change my other function as well. It's already becoming a bit more unreadable, isn't it, in line? I think it is anyway. So now we might take Darius's approach and think, well, I don't really want all that inline. I probably just want to call something like, well, hold on. So I'll show you the two approaches. Set state ends there. Do I write function inside of a class? Huh? You cannot. No. So instead you just write the name of the function, update count. I guess I should put decrease count because that's the specific one that we're doing. You got me thinking, like that, I think. Yep. And then inside of it, it's not even going to be set state, is it? Is it this dot set state? Yeah. So I made a mistake down here, as is very easy to do. You forget off the odd list here. You forget about dot state there, and all things like that. So on click this time, we're just going to invoke the decrease count method. And it looks a bit neater again, right? I'd probably make sure that that was on a new line, and that was down there, I guess. And then do the same for that. Yeah, and then that second one's a bit more readable now, and I could do the same for the first, or I could just cheat and do that, and then it looks nice. But yeah. Whatever you prefer, as long as you can read it and other people can read it. I think that's pretty much done. Have I missed anything for those that have done class-based components? I usually miss something. So we've set the constructor, initialized the state. We've done one method by calling a function. We've done the other method using this .set state inline. Everything else should be the same. I think we added the render.
You export it the same way.
Export the same way. Yeah, absolutely. Export the same way. That's nothing to do with whether it's a class or a function. Let's see. Still seems to work. If I refresh, should go back to 0. Yeah, and then so that still works.
Still rendering an old phone.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It should definitely still work then. So good point. It's rendering from count workshop rather than count workshop class. That's the one. It's still there, which is good. And it does still work as well. So we did successfully rewrite that as a class-based component. Let's see them side by side. That's not that one, that one. Right. So firstly, we've got 29 lines of code versus 16 lines of code. Maybe you could argue that I've added an extra 4 or 5 lines because of that bit, but still considerably shorter, and I think more readable as well for the functional based component. And look at all this nesting going on as well. We've got a render, then a return, then a fragment, then some paragraphs. Yeah, we've just got a couple of levels there.
So you did do the increase function as well?
I need to do what, sorry?
You did add the increase function, so that would add even more lines. We just got a decrease.
Yeah. But I'm saying that this technically could have still been written in line, really, couldn't it? So the very minimum we could have got the class down to is about 25 lines, I guess, compared to 16. And it's not all about, what's shortest number of lines and stuff like that, but it is a lot about what is the most readable and what is the most understandable, and what are you going to make less mistakes writing, what you're going to spend more time debugging. And for me, I always spend more time debugging class-based components, because it's almost a guarantee that in a big component I've probably missed off of this somewhere, or I've probably what else would I have done? I don't know, but yeah. If you're using props as well, everything's this dot props dot something, unless you deconstruct things straight away. But again, deconstruction for me is a lot easier to do up there inside of the function inputs than it is doing it up there above the return and things like that. So yeah, I massively prefer it, and I think that's quite a powerful illustration. Here.
Why would you have the structure props inside a class?
We can do it inside a class, but
I mean, inside the
where would you like to do it? Or in the constructor?
No, I'm just after the constructor.
After the constructor. So how would you do it? You do.
Okay, we have to get.
You see what I mean? Because it automatically assumes that this is. So that the props would go in there. Then you'd have to store them in. You'd have access to the props definitely, but you can't put const up there.
Yeah,
or
because
let.
it's a constructor.
You would have to do it down here inside of the render, and then you can just write plain old variable assignment.
But if I don't have it in the constructor.
Oh, you want to put it in the constructor, but if you put it in the constructor, then those variables aren't going to be available to you down here. Yeah, because the constructor is essentially separate to what's down here. I mean, we can try put some props in if you want to do that example. Let's go back to app.js. We've got a counter. Let's give it. I don't know what to say. Let's just give it a message, right? Message. Why not? Oh. I don't know. Have I spelled it wrong? I'm just gonna go hello. Safer. Right. So then, to display that, we could just write up there. Did I put MSG or message? I can't remember now. MSG. Alright, MSG standing for message, and then it's a bit excessive, but the message is so that's that one done. Nice and easy. If I just double check that has rendered. Yeah, the message is hello. Cool, that all works. Now let's try and do the same with our class. So yeah, so it's coming in as a prop. We could destructure that prop straight away, I hope. I'm not even sure, you know. I'm a bit confused whether I have to put it there as well, to be honest. Usually we'd put props and props, but let's try, and then current value of message or current message is, it would be this dot state. Can we just this dot message? It should be technically. Does that work? App count workshop class. That's the one. So we haven't got anything displayed. And it's probably because this dot message is undefined, I imagine. I know it's not a good place to put it, but we can just trigger that and put the console.log in there. And we can try various combinations. Is it this dot message? Is it? So we want to decrease, wasn't it? So it's the undefined. So this dot message is undefined. Just message. Yeah. Now it definitely doesn't like it.
Maybe it has to be props.
Say again, sorry?
Maybe it has to
There
be
was
props.
something in the right message that passing something.
Yeah, just without the structure, props.
Yeah. And then we can do this dot props dot message. I agree with that. do that. We can do this dot props dot message, and that works. That's fair enough. But what if we want to use destructuring and not have to write this dot props each time? Well, the only way I currently know is doing it down here, and we could say const. Hold on, let me think about this. Const message equals this dot props. That's not destruction, though, is it? Const message. It's not. What is it? It's a string. No, it's an object. Const message equals this dot props, like that, I think. And then we could do message down there. Oh, no, that's because I've typed it wrong, obviously. Is this dot props dot message? I'm a bit confused by that. Why is that done that? Because this dot props dot message worked, right? Yeah. So just by writing message instead, we got MS. Oh, no, it did work. It did work. I think. Let's just refresh it. I'm confused now. Yeah, that was just a weird re-render. I think it caught it halfway between a render. So yeah, that's the only way I currently know how to destructure the props, is doing it there inside of the render, which is a pain in the ass to me, but it could be my knowledge of classes, to be honest, but that's the way I've often seen it done, is destructuring down there. And if you could destructure up here, well, why haven't I seen that before?
So that's a bit annoying. Can we use props in the use state inside the function that is not rendered?
Inside of the use state, so you're going back to the hook based one now.
Yeah, the hooks.
You want to
Can we use props, which is not returned?
Yeah, inside of the whole function you will have access to this message. We could go up here. We could set the original counter to hello if we wanted. I'm rendering the wrong one, sorry, that was confusing. Yeah. Yeah, the current value of the count is hello. Yeah. So it's just available in the whole function. It's not split into pieces like here we've got a constructor, then we've got methods, then we've got a render, and then we can. Yeah, it's just.
So there is actual advantage of using this state, not only.
For me, there's lots of advantages. Yeah. I know what I'd rather work with every day. I'd rather work with those just plain old JavaScript functions. As a JavaScript developer, you use them every day. Classes you might use, but you might not use them every day. So I think you're just going to be more skilled at using functions and understanding how they work than battling with classes sometimes. So classes were only introduced anyway into JavaScript in 2015, yeah, and they weren't very popular. So not many people adopted them unless they had to for React. And previously, you had to use class-based components to access state. There was no way to access state inside of a function or to create stateful variables inside of a function previously. But then this year, that all changed with the introduction of hooks.
Could we get job refactoring?
So you might actually get some sort of jobs refactoring. And one of our past students, he was here I think in April, so we weren't actually teaching hooks then. Even though they come out in February, we weren't teaching them yet. And the first thing he got told when he went to his new job, he got a job over in Berlin, was, right, learn React hooks. because he hadn't learned it on the course, and that was the main thing they wanted him to learn, because their team had adopted it, their team loved it, and they didn't want him writing class-based components. It had to be hooks. So before he started on any code base, learn hooks, and then we'll let you loose on the code base pretty much. So some companies view it as very important, and you go to a lot of these meetups now, and the more senior guys they're all using hooks. So yeah. I would encourage you to learn them as much as possible, but be aware of how to still write it in a class-based component, because you will see. I hesitate to call it legacy code when it's going to be less than a year old, but you know what I mean. It's going to be code that maybe hasn't been written in the last couple of months. It's going to be a bit older than that, and yeah, you'll still see a lot of class-based components in React applications at the moment, and that's not going to change. And they still work perfectly, and they will continue to work perfectly. They're just a bit more of a pain for me to understand and to work with. That's my personal opinion. I think a lot of people feel the same. Cool. It's been quite a long workshop again. I mean, I'm happy just to play around a bit more, or it's now 7:45, so I don't know if you want to spend just 45 minutes doing your own sort of projects and tasks, or I can set up a mini challenge. The board challenge, yeah, there's nothing on the board because unfortunately I rubbed it off yesterday, which I didn't even think about you guys. I apologise. Did we do a React board challenge last week? Is that what we did? Oh, because I wasn't here, was I? So did you do the board challenge at all?
No.
So I guess if you give me 10 minutes, I could put a React board challenge on the board, and that will specifically be a props and a state-based React board challenge. That might be quite a nice end to the session. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Yeah. Give me 10 minutes, and I will have that up for you. Thank you.